There's got to be a better way.
Yo, what is up? Welcome back to another week of How to Health Longevity 101 edition. My name is Kevin. I run liftandbalance.com, where we take aim at all things health and do it in an odd, weird, interesting, and highly sarcastic manner. Today, we are looking at some interesting longevity data that has been emerging over the last couple of years, if that makes any sense, suggesting that the beneficial effects of dietary regimens on metabolic health and survival may not be due to calories alone, but to the combination of total caloric intake, the length of fasting periods, and their interaction. Yeah, that's all I got. And we will be peeling back the metaphorical onion, great prebiotic, on if we can potentially get all the benefits of CR, or calorie restriction, which has been shown in many animal models to promote longevity, without the CR part, or the restricting calories part. I know, crazy, right? Because anyone who has tried a restrictive diet knows it ain't fun.
Zero fun.
And it's definitely not sustainable. That's why you see so many diets fail, especially in this present day abundant food culture that we've all been lucky enough to be born into. And I'm serious, we are rather lucky. This is the first time in however many hundreds of thousands to million years where food availability is for once not a major survival liability and burden. Now, the type and quality of food is a whole nother story. But for most, surviving the winter will not come down to being able to find food. And if you are in this camp, take a quick pause with me and let's be grateful. Okay, we're back. Now today we are looking into some animal research that has aimed to tease out this interaction between dietary restriction and length of fasting periods, in an effort, again, to identify their interplay. That sounded a little bit scandalous, didn't it? Science will do that. And ultimately, hopefully, help try to distinguish the quote-unquote minimal effective dose when it comes to getting some of the longevity benefits out of a protocol. Which, if you want more of, we talk all about in the fully loaded Fasting 101 playlist, which you can catch up here and down in the description below. Okay, you ready? Glasses on, let's nerd out. Oh yeah, and before we get into it, the obligatory disclaimer, remember, this is a mouse model, not a human model. That is all. First, a brief history. Most mammals have the ability to adapt to a short-term loss of energy intake without a substantial impact to their present-day vitality or health. And as we know from the aforementioned playlist, alternating cycles of feeding and fasting trigger specific biochemical processes mediated by several nutrient-sensing pathways, two of the prominent ones being mTOR and AMPK. And we know, again from previous research, that calorie restriction, or CR, is powerful, with research indicating that its associated mechanisms are likely to be relevant for human health and longevity. How? It is thought to drive two unique pathways by inducing, one, less caloric intake, and two, longer post-meal fasting periods, both of which are absent in modern-day Western society, which typically have minimum fasting periods between meals, with the longest one being when we're literally unconscious. So researchers took a mouse model to more clearly delineate and compare calorie restriction to ad libitum, or anytime, anywhere feeding, as it pertains to, one, the restriction of calories, and two, the introduction of periodic fasting, or longer fasting periods between meals. So let's take a look at this clever 2018 study by the NIH published in Cell Metabolism. Like I prefaced, this study looked at something rather interesting in our furry little four-legged friends, mice, investigating the effects of eating patterns on morbidity and mortality, the state of being diseased, and the state of dying, regardless of diet composition. To do this, the researchers broke the mice into 3 groups: a calorie restriction group, a single meal feeding group or a 1 meal a day group, and an ad libitum 24/7 food availability group. The last two being fed the same amount of daily calories. Now, this cohort of just over 290 mice were divided into two groups initially. One consuming a naturally sourced diet and one consuming a more processed diet to reflect the more modern eating habits of Western society. From there, an ad libitum group was created and a calorie restriction group was created, with the CR group consuming 30% less calories than the other two groups. You see what they're doing here? Clever, right? This strategy right here was used to accommodate the difference in caloric density between the diets and to try to normalize the effects across all groups. Now, the amount of food eaten was also normalized across all groups. By doing so, the ad libitum group and the single meal a day group were found to consume approximately the same amount of calories each day. And like I said before, the CR groups had a 30% restriction on all caloric intake when compared to the ad libitum and the single meal a day group. So, what did the researchers find? First, everybody's favorite and my personal least favorite outcome, weight. Interestingly, in terms of weight, body weight was significantly lower in the single meal a day group fed the natural diet when compared to the natural ad libitum group, while there was no difference between the processed 1 meal a day group and the processed ad libitum group. While the mice on the 30% calorie restriction did what you thought they would do and they lost weight, regardless of diet. Okay, no major surprises here, but what about some metabolic markers? First, for the ad libitum groups, fluctuations in respiratory exchange ratio, RER, were minimal regardless of what diet the mice consumed. This essentially was an assay for the mice staying in a metabolic state where they were continuing to utilize glucose as their main form of energy. On the other hand, the single meal a day mice and the calorie restriction mice saw a large fluctuation in RER, exhibiting enhanced metabolic flexibility. Together, this data shows that the single meal a day group and the calorie restriction group had extended periods of fasting, which were associated with a higher amplitude of respiratory exchange rate, and thus were more metabolically flexible. Pretty interesting. Now, what about insulin resistance? Well, as you can imagine, the CR group exhibited an improvement in insulin sensitivity in terms of fasting glucose and insulin levels. And surprisingly, to me, there was no significant difference between single meal a day and ad libitum groups. Now, this was surprising until I saw that the single meal a day group essentially had access to their food and were grazing on it for 12 to 15 hours, depending on diet, which really doesn't make sense to me, but that's what was in the research. Also, as expected, the CR group was associated with higher circulating levels of beta-hydroxybutyrate, otherwise known as one of the primary ketones that gets created when we flip the metabolic switch from glucose burning to fatty acid burning. But this increase in beta-hydroxybutyrate was not seen in the single meal a day group and the ad libitum group. This is interesting, but as I pointed out, the fact that the single meal a day group had feeding windows spanning 12 to 15 hours, it definitely makes sense. And finally, let's take a look at the holy grail, lifespan and longevity. Researchers found a mean lifespan extension of 11% and 28% respectively in the single meal a day groups and the calorie restriction groups. However, it was not clear if diet composition actually made a difference. And the lack of changes in many metabolic markers when comparing the different eating regimens has researchers suggesting that diet may not be as big of a factor as they thought. When survival was analyzed by diet type, there were no significant differences for the curves of ad libitum, calorie restriction, and single meal a day between the two types of diets, the highly processed and the more natural. Having researchers once again cautiously suggest that eating patterns rather than dietary composition is a primary determinant in longevity regulation for mice. Now, please take this with a grain of salt. A few things. There have been several studies that show that macronutrient composition play a role in health and longevity under ad libitum feeding conditions. So before you throw out all your veggies and go create an Oreo castle, I'd hang on to them. Because many times the best strategy is attacking longevity eating on multiple fronts. The when you eat, the how much you eat, and the what you eat. Another interesting note was the calorie restriction mice and the single meal a day mice seem to die from the same causes as the ad libitum mice, but onset of these diseases were just later in life. This aligns with some of the interesting human centenarian research that shows that human centenarians essentially die from the same thing everyone else dies from. Just the onset of these metabolic diseases are delayed 10, 20, 30 years. Prevention, always easier than reversal. So what does this all mean? Okay, data from this animal model suggests that extended periods of fasting, regardless of diet composition, might be an effective strategy in enhancing health span and longevity in mice, and help fend off the diseases of metabolic syndrome, pushing them later in life. To date, there has been very little negative research associated with 12 to 13 hour time-restricted feeding, which is naturally practiced by most long-lived populations across the world. And it may even be a way to leverage the benefits that are known from calorie restriction without the painstaking daily task of restricting calories. Pretty cool. Oh, and by the way, if you are interested in looking how to safely and sustainably implement a intermittent fasting or time-restricted feeding protocol, video just dropped on that. I will link it in the description below, how to baseline yourself and build a protocol that best fits your lifestyle, because everyone's different. Links are down below. So that's today's research review. Let me know the fasting protocol that you are following, tested, or interested in down in the comments below. And if you feel like tapping the keyboard a little more, let me know your experience thus far. Always interested in learning what you guys are testing at home. And with that, the closing obligatory disclaimer: this was a mouse model, not a human model. The exciting thing is more and more research is coming out by the month on how intermittent fasting, time-restricted feeding, and all of the above affect us and fit into our lifestyle and can be used as a clinical application. Super, super cool. As always, just a friendly reminder that there is no better day to start taking back what's yours, taking back ownership of your most valuable asset, your health.